There was a time when everything held together, not because it was simple, but because it did not resist. Things made sense in a way a structure makes sense. You don't question it while it stands. You move inside it. You rely on it. You assume it will continue. And most of the time it does. The problem begins quietly. Not with collapse, but with a detail that doesn't fit. Something small, easy to ignore. A sentence that sounds right but does not quite hold when you repeat it. A decision that works once but not twice. Nothing breaks, but something no longer aligns. At first it feels unnecessary to look closer. There is a kind of comfort in leaving things as they are, not out of laziness, but out of preservation. If the whole still stands, why question a single point? But the point doesn't disappear. It returns in slightly different forms, in different situations, always small enough to dismiss, but persistent enough to remain. This is where analysis begins, not as a method, but as a response. To analyze something is to stop trusting its surface. It is to take what appears stable and test whether it actually holds. Most people don't do this for long. Not because they can't, but because it leads somewhere inconvenient. If you follow a thought far enough, it will eventually reach its limit. Every idea has a point where it can no longer explain what is happening. Up to that point, it feels sufficient. Beyond it, it begins to distort. It forces explanations. It stretches itself to remain valid. That stretching is visible if you are willing to see it. And that is the moment that matters. Not when something fails completely, but when you recognize that it has already stopped being true. This recognition is judgment, not an opinion, not a reaction, a line. It does not announce itself, it doesn't argue, it simply marks the place where continuation becomes false. Most people avoid drawing that line, because once it is drawn, something has to change. You can no longer rely on what you relied on. You lose a certain continuity, a certain ease. It is tempting to delay, to adjust the line, to pretend the boundary is further away than it is, but that comes at cost. Because what you refuse to judge, you are forced to carry. And over time, the weight accumulates, not as pressure, but as distortion. Things begin to feel unclear, not because they are complex, but because they are no longer precise. This is where strength is usually misunderstood. Strength is often described as persistence or endurance. Those are different qualities though. First is physical, second is spiritual. First is holding, second is working outward. In scientific language, first is gravity, second is electromagnetic force. One of the beautiful qualities of strength is the ability to stop, to recognize the exact point where something no longer holds, and to accept it without resistance, without negotiation, not because you want to let go, but because continuing would be inaccurate. This requires attention, not intensity but consistency, a willingness to look closely, even when nothing seems urgent, because judgment is not something you apply at the end, it is something that forms gradually, as you observe without interruption. And when it becomes clear, it is already decided. There is no force in it, only precision. Judgment does not divide things for the sake of separation. It reveals their actual shape, and sometimes that shape includes an edge, a place where something ends. Not dramatically, not violently, just exactly where it stops being true.